tee it up and understand the money, which has changed a bit since we expected it to come to us with a more substantial sum attached.
So we will, I'll present the policy and then we can talk about
The money, that sounds great.
That sounds great.
Okay.
Great.
And I'm sitting here.
You're sitting right here
Rob is behind me and I.
in the big comfy chair.
But she will speak to you out of bed.
So welcome, everybody. It is Tuesday, April 4th. And we are here in Senate and Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. And today we are turning to some of our priority House bills, which are have come to us over the period of crossover. And we're going to begin with H66, the Paid Family Leave Bill. And we welcome State Representative Thomas Stevens, Chair of House General.
Thank you. Representative Tom Stevens. I represent Washington Chittenden District, which is Waterbury, Bolton, Huntington, and Beals Gore. I'm going to thank you for having us in this morning. This bill is different from the last version that we saw in 2019 and 2020, and we'll be happy to do a quick run through. And I see that Damien is here.
Yeah, and Damien will walk us
the details. But essentially, this bill has two parts. The easiest part to put together logically is the insurance part, which are the later sections. Basically, the proposal is for 12 weeks of leave per every 12 months for serious illnesses. That can include family bonding if you have a child, care for yourself, or care for a family member who is seriously ill. And the definition of that is pretty clear. And I'll let Representative Kornheiser talk about the financial construct of the proposal. What this bill does, which isn't given a lot of airtime on in the first half of the bill, is that it revises a bit the protected job leave of our PFL, our paid family, or our parental family leave law. Right now, parental family leave in Vermont is limited to 10. If you're an employer of 10 employees or more, or if you're an employer of 15, and that's one of those is for medical leave. Damien can be precise about that. One of them is for parental leave, and that's unpaid leave. That's job protection that's offered. We know that 80% of the businesses in the state of Vermont have more than 10 employees. I'm sorry, misspoke. 80% of the businesses have 10 employees or less. Another 10% of 20 or less. And so this bill proposes that when the insurance program goes into effect in 2026, that job protection would be offered to every employee. So that's a big change in this bill, and we felt it was a positive change for Vermont workers. It also adds the concept to the of bereavement leave, which we discussed in the last bill. And then it also has what's called safe leave for victims or survivors of domestic violence when they have to deal with issues relating to any domestic violence incidents in their home, which could be the incidents themselves or any of the court cases, that if they have to deal with them, that their job is protected. And by job protection, we mean conventionally that if I'm gone for X number of weeks, the employer has to hold a spot for me at the same salary. It may not be the same, it may not be able to be the same position. We heard a lot of testimony of especially the smaller businesses that said, well, if Tom is the one paralegal in my office and he's absent, and if I have to hire another paralegal, for more than a temp thing, what about him? And the answer is, well, maybe there's an equivalent job. And there are also other limitations on what an employee can expect in terms of job protection. If I'm the only person who can do that job and I need to take time off, and then they can replace me. So there's elements that still exist in the law. So the idea here, again, serious illness is defined, serious health condition is defined. We have a pretty extensive list of what makes a family. Damien can go through those details. And it also adds a definition of qualifying military exigency leave. So if you have to deal with a spouse or a family member who is overseas, where it's not a serious illness, where you're just dealing with the process that it takes in order to allow your spouse to serve the armed forces, there's an ability for a family member to take leave to deal with that, and that's protected leave. So the exigency leave, bereavement leave, and safe leave are all fairly new to this bill from, if you have a memory of it from several years ago. And I think that's, and we also set this up as a piece of the treasury. So the treasurer's office would be in charge of setting up this program of hiring out for the software that's needed in order to run it, and that they would house it as a division within their office. We asked the treasurer to review this and to try to understand why we would do this as opposed to the Department of Labor, which we tried to do several years ago, or we looked at a potential private third-party administrator. This year, we did not look at a third-party administrator. The treasurer offered to look into this and to do detailed work on this, and has come up with a plan, which Representative Kornheiser can explain about how they would handle this. We took testimony from the Department of Labor. They are still very far behind with the idea of the new unemployment system, never mind instituting a system like this that would be much bigger. It would be as broad as what the unemployment and the Department of Labor would need, but it's a pretty big program. So the Treasury has given us an estimate on what it would cost, which gets to your money questions later. And I think that will do it for me in terms of the policy stuff. We're really proud of the work we did, needless to say, on the job protection level. And of course, the insurance level is something that we feel fits into how, in this larger discussion of how do we keep people here, how do we attract people here, people who are working, how do we take care of the Vermonters who are here now, who may work in positions that don't have 10 or 15 employees, smaller businesses. And when we determined pretty early on, as we have in the past, that an insurance policy is much less expensive to both the employee and the employers than trying to pay for out-of-pocket, trying to take care of their employees through out-of-pocket expenses. And so I'll leave it there and pass the microphone to Representative Kornheiser, and I'll be here.
May I just ask you one quick question, which is how many other states, because I think this is certainly, as we look at how do we take care of Vermonters, how do we keep people here, how do we attract people, because this committee, as you know, is very interested in attracting people to the state.
Yeah.
In addition to taking care of Vermonters, how many other states have a paid family leave program this substantial that is set up?
Substantial is an artful word to say. There's about 12 states that have it now, that have implemented it over. Rhode Island and California have had it for much longer.
Right.
Rhode Island's plan was originally just disability, but theirs was the only one in place for many, many years. California's been in place for about 30 years. And California just passed legislation that increased the wage replacement in the insurance up to 90%. And again, we could talk about how it got to 90% rather than 100% that was in the bills introduced. Different states have different rules. Some of them are for 12 weeks, some of them are for 6 weeks, some of them are. New Hampshire has a voluntary one that's very similar to what Governor Scott introduced or is introducing to state employees as of July 1. So it's every state is slightly different. That's the downside of the federal government not providing a framework to build on. And so we're taking, again, the work that we've done over the years. We have a generous definition of family. We have, but I think it's well vetted. I think the 90% reimbursement rate is, up to 100%. It's basically up to 100% of the state median income, which is about $60,000. And we're talking about that full replacement for people who, for the 200,000 Vermonters who file income taxes for less than $60,000 a year. And so it's a big program. We think it's the right program, given that the unknowns of any third-party administrator is as there are as numerous as the unknowns may be with developing a state program.
Right. Thank you very much. Terrific.
So nice to be here with
It's
all
so
of you.
good to have you.
Thank you. Hi, Representative Emily Kornheiser from Brattleboro. Very glad to be here. Chair of House Ways and Means. So I think of last biennium as the biennium that we dealt with sort of the crisis of the pandemic, right? We spent the federal money. We passed all these emergency medical provisions. We really acted out of urgency. And I think of this biennium as the biennium that we have the time and the resources to look at the lessons that we actually learned from that pandemic, now that we have a little bit more breathing room and still resources at our fingertips, to see what are the lessons that we learned from the pandemic, what are the lessons that our constituents learned from the pandemic, that our neighbors learned from the pandemics, that we can take forward to build a stronger Vermont that cares for itself and for each other. And so I think that during the pandemic, families learned how important it was to have the resources to both care for each other, care for their neighbors, and have an economic environment that allowed that. Whether that is building a very resilient, robust childcare system, so families can depend on something outside of themselves, or being able to take the time off of work to care for someone in the event of a medical emergency, to care for children when they need care. But that what we saw during the pandemic was that we need government to step up in these times of either catastrophe or just like the general fragility and challenges of life. And we saw what happens when we're able to do that, how communities come together, how they become stronger through that. So I see age 66, our work on childcare, our work on school meals, and our work on the child tax credit as really part and parcel of those lessons learned from the pandemic about what a stronger Vermont looks like, that really honors the values that Vermonters have about caring for each other, about caring for aging loved ones in the home, about making sure that children have a safe, strong, loving start, and that we can ask Vermonters to really step up and invest in that. So age 66, as it's structured, again, is built fiscally with a 90% wage replacement level. And we did that because we know how many Vermonters, and this is another lesson we learned during the pandemic, how many Vermonters are living paycheck to paycheck or have a very small amount of savings available to them. We saw during the pandemic what happened when Vermonters felt a little bit safer and were living a little bit less paycheck to paycheck, how much stabler families became, how chronic stress levels were lowered, how that improves child protection, all those things. With a 90% wage replacement level, we know that families can actually afford to take this leave. If we go any further below that, it might cost a little bit less money for families to be investing in these resources, but it means that the families who need it aren't necessarily going to take it. So with a universal program at a high wage replacement level, the program actually works for the people who need it. Any less, the program doesn't really work anymore because the people who need it can't afford to access it because they just can't afford to take that time off of work. And so we want to create a system that is both equitable and equal, meaning that everyone can access who needs it. Because there's nothing worse than being in your time of need in your family, being in a crisis situation, and then having a government bureaucracy that says, yes, you have this benefit, and then realizing that actually you don't, or you can't figure out how to navigate it. So we built the system both fiscally and programmatically so that it can really show up for Vermonters when they need it. So how do we pay for it? We're paying for it with a payroll tax because it is an insurance program. And Vermonters and Americans are familiar with a payroll tax that pays for an insurance program, right? We have Medicare, we have Social Security, and then we have family medical leave. It is right now set at 0.55%, with half being paid for by employers and half being paid for by employees. Importantly, in Vermont, we are also enabling self-employed people to opt into the system, paying the full 0.55% rather than splitting it. Because we know that so many Vermonters have multiple jobs or self-employed, and we want to make sure this is, again, something that covers everyone in their emergency time of need. So what do you get for that? And that's huge for me. So Pat very kindly created a table for me about some different scenarios. So at an annual,
Which I hope we'll have shared with us.
oh yes, I'm sure you'll have many things shared with you. And this is like the best, strongest staff team on this bill. It's been
That's
incredible.
great.
But so at an annual wage income of $60,000 a year, which is actually a little higher than the average wage, right?
Right.
It's roughly equal. Is the annual employee contribution is just $165 a year. And so for that $165 a year, a Vermonter gets 12 weeks of paid leave at 90% wage replacement. That's an incredible benefit. That also means that at $165 a year, an employer is able to offer an employee 12 weeks of paid leave a year. So we had folks come into our committee, medium-sized business owners, would be considered small nationally, but are fairly huge employers in Vermont, who ran the numbers, offer some degree of leave already in their businesses, but ran the numbers for how much this would cost them, and see that they would save money by doing this in the statewide pool. Because right now, they're covering 12 weeks of paid leave out of their own pockets, rather than just on this really fairly low payroll tax of $165 a year for your average Vermonter. And so businesses that have run the numbers see that in addition to the fact that they would save, businesses that are already offering leave would save money because they're self-funding their leave programs. Businesses that so far have not been able to afford to offer leave programs are thrilled that they'll be able to have leave for their employees. Because if you have an employee, we had employers come and talk to us. If you have an employee who's struggling, who needs to care for their kid, or their aging parent who's, just got released from the hospital, whatever it is, or has their own medical condition, and that person is coming into work because they can't afford not to, you can't afford to pay their leave, it puts an employer in an impossible situation. And so we heard from employers that were thrilled at this idea of paying in on this payroll tax and their employees being able to get this benefit that the employer could never have been able to offer them on their own. So that's the payroll tax. It's set at double the Social Security threshold. So it continues to be that same percentage up to $320,000, which is 200% of the Social Security threshold. And in order to make this payroll taxes are not the most progressive mechanism, right? And so in order to make it more progressive, we also added a refundable tax credit for the lowest income Vermonters so that they would be able to get their payroll tax back at the end of the year after they paid it. And we sort of have some mechanisms like that already, with health insurance. So that was an exciting part of it. Once the program is established in a few years, it entirely pays for itself. The administration, the IT costs, and the benefit payouts are entirely paid out of the trust fund that is funded through these payroll taxes. But given that we have a great deal of unexpected revenue this year and next year, and we want to make sure that we use that revenue this year and next year for one-time costs that are going to make huge ripple effect investments that will make Vermont a more stable, welcoming place into the future, we are asking our appropriations committees to use one-time money to do both the sort of setup IT costs, but also to pre-fund some degree of the trust fund so that Vermonters can be able to access the benefits almost as soon as they start paying into the trust fund. Because I think it's really important for my constituents to see quickly the benefits of both our actions and of their tax dollars. And so we're asking to use one-time money to sort of pre-fund the creation of this program. That's a summary. I'm really excited about it. I feel really passionate about these sort of like lessons of the pandemic and what it means to build a Vermont that can take care of each other. And I think this is one really key piece of it.
An applicable lesson learned.
Yes.
What was the vote on the floor? Do you remember the final vote?
I don't remember the final vote. It was,
99 to 32, but there were many people missing.
Right, no, I
yeah,
remember.
we
you
voted
had
a
one.
few different times on a few different things.
Right, I remember you
The
had a bunch
original
of-
sponsors on the bill, we had 103 House sponsors in the original bill, and all of them voted for it. And then we actually had more votes from folks who hadn't originally sponsored the bill who voted yes. So I don't want to hypothesize, but I think if everyone was in their seats, it would have been 108. So I'm going to hypothesize.
Right, so it wasn't strictly on party lines either.
No, we
Close,
pulled, it was very close to party lines. We just have a very large caucus.
Yeah.
It's making the vote was late at night, so there were
Yeah.
many people.
Well, many of your votes
It was actually a lot of parents actually left the floor. We have a lot of parents with young children in the house. And so a lot of parents actually left the floor. having that minor than people.
So before we move to Damien to walk through the bill, anybody have questions for the two chairs who shepherded this through the House?
Just a couple of them. I just want to understand, so the current level of family or of benefits are, there's a 10 employee
So there are
category
no,
and a 30 employee category,
10 and 15.
or 10 and 15.
Yeah,
So
that
what
would be
is
right.
One
the,
is for parental,
Okay.
look, this is, so,
these are job protections and not paid leave.
yeah, so the
Okay.
job protections here
okay,
will stay 10 and 15 until 2026, until the insurance plan went into place. And it would increase the leaves that were available up a level. But right now it's 10, again, Damien could tell you the difference. I always get it confused between, is it for parental leave, 10 weeks for parental leave and 12 weeks or see, I'm getting it all confused.
So I
Yeah,
think,
that's
I think,
okay.
what-
well, what
employees
is
for
it
one.
becoming?
I think when it
in
comes
this?
down to the
Yeah.
fact
It
is
would
that
become
the,
that everybody has a job protected leave by 2026, when the insurance program goes in place. All employees will have job protection under this definition of what that means.
Okay,
the
so
first
here it
half of
says
the-
10 or more employees, but is that something else?
so the first half of the bill is
Yeah.
labor law, basically, and it's about unprotected leave.
Okay,
And does some sort of lining up of labor law that Damien will take you through. And then when the bill, when the program kicks off, it expands those unpaid leave job protections, that labor law job protection part, to everyone who's able to access the benefits, which is all Vermonters who are working at that point,
okay.
No
All
matter
right.
the size of the company.
no matter the
All
size
right.
of the company.
So then, to come up with the projected expenses, you had to make some assumptions of how many people would take leave.
And there's a whole really lovely sort of take-up rates of by leave type that JFO did modeling after the other 12 states who have done this. And we actually had someone in my committee when we were talking about the safe leave and how JFO modeled the safe leave take-up rates that really like teared up at really the number of Vermonters who need safe leave and don't have it right now.
Right.
So then, is there a provision, say after 5 years, our experience is different, could we adjust it?
There are annual, and Damien will talk you through this, there's annual reports that we'll receive on the trust fund and the trust fund health and how we would adjust things based on experience ratings and all that. It's on some level sort of similar to the mechanisms we use for unemployment insurance, but on some levels a little bit different. Given that there's sort of different incentives and disincentives built in,
Okay.
but Damien will talk you through all that.
And so it being a trust fund, does that mean it couldn't be used by other sources?
Right.
Like our,
Yeah, it's a
like
protected.
the VHCB,
It's
it
a
wouldn't
protected
be
fund.
that, it
No, it's a
wouldn't be.
protected fund.
Okay, cool. And then the treasurer would administer it,
Mhm.
which is a little different, but I totally understand why you're proposing that. If that wasn't, like, in a few years, if you wanted that to go back to labor, because labor solved
If,
all
if,
their problems.
if labor
Would
became.
you switch it back? Would that make more sense?
And I'm sorry, I'm not, waiting for you to finish your sentence.
That's okay.
terrible. I'm so sorry.
You know what I'm getting at.
The treasurer's office has done an enormous degree of research on this since the summer, and feels really confident about their ability to administer the program and very excited about it. And very excited about staffing up for the first round of hiring for it. The programs are held in different departments all over the country, so there's no one way to do this. And yes, sure, we could transfer it, to a different department if we ever needed to, absolutely, if the Department of Labor was ever able to. But because most Department of Labor, almost all Department of Labor positions are actually federally funded, it becomes very hard for them to be doing things that are sort of state initiatives. And we've seen the fallout of that in a number of different ways, I think, over the years.
Okay, interesting. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Not in direct response to your question, Senator, but two things to keep in mind. The 90% wage replacement is for people who make up to like approximately $60,000 a year, just in our housing world. That's 80% of the area median income in, at least in Chittenden County, in non-rural counties in the northwest corner. And includes professions that, again, it's over 200,000 people who file taxes, adjusted gross income taxes under $60,000. So just given it the context of when we were talking about affordable housing, almost everybody that we're talking about who qualifies for affordable housing would make this income or less. The more you make, the less you get reimbursed, because it caps the reimbursement rate at that level. So if you make $100,000 a year, you're not going to get, you're going to get the $1,100 or whatever we cap it at, but it's going to represent a smaller amount of their income. And the second piece to remember, I think, in the bill that I didn't touch on was if private employers want to opt out, there is a way for them to opt out. They have to hit certain levels of equivalency in the plan, their private plan and with the public plan. So that option.
So they can't opt out unless they have something
They have to offer.
to offer.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Got it. Thank you. Andy?
Now, that would cover your national corporations that have, or multi-state that have corporate plans. Okay.
Yeah, and it also, the federal government is also exempted from this because we can't tell them to do stuff. Yeah.
It's too bad.
Yeah.
But if I hear it correctly, that the ERISA employers are not covered. Okay.
Damien can.
Damien will go
Yeah,
through that.
I'll get into that. They are covered, but they can use their ERISA plans to opt out of the state program.
Okay, I think on that, let's transition to Damien. And I know we have a short time, but we'll come back to it. We'll get as far as we can get. Thank you for teeing it up for us. Thank you for your work on this. And it's a huge amount of the beginning of session work by the House. So
Thank you for all the work you're about to do on it. We really appreciate that very much.
And I believe we'll hear from Senator Clarkson and Harrison later today on this one.
at 3:30, we're coming.
So that'll be for sponsorship and then we'll.
Great, thank you. Well, it's great to have you, the chairs who shepherded this through. So it to help us anchor ourselves in this
Feel
work.
free to reach out in a way that we don't usually reach out, but
We're
our
big,
doors are always open.
we're big into reaching out.
And I do hope you can pass this just so Damien never has to work on it again.
Yeah, well, there's an idea. Okay, Damien, we have 15 minutes. I know it's not a lot of time. We're sorry we were so long on the floor, but there we are. We also
That's all
got
right.
some good stuff done, and we will return to this to finish walking through.
So I've
it.
been going to auction school, so I'm just gonna go through this bill.
Wow.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding.
I'd like to know
Joke.
each section, how much you could get for
Um,
each section. Are we gonna auction off each section?
Yeah,
Actually, you know where we could make money? Seriously, auctioning off the sections, the technical corrections bill. Do I hear $50?
oh, please don't do that though, because some of those really need to pass.
I know. We had a good
And
vote.
they're in pretty obscure areas.
They are indeed.
Yeah,
I tried to touch on some of them.
I appreciated the haikus.
Oh, good.
I was
glad to hear that.
listening.
Oh, good.
So,
Good.
for the record, I'm Damian Leonard from the Office of Legislative Counsel. So given that I have 14 minutes and counting,
Sorry.
I am going to give you guys the 75,000 foot weather balloon view.
Great.
Um,
The drone view.
They can see pretty clearly.
Oh, that's true. 70,000. That's a much higher.
Whatever.
yeah, so we're outside of commercial airspace on this one. We're going up
We're going up way
to
high.
very, very high territory. So I'll do that. I'll kind of orient you to the bill. I sent a summary,
Oh, you did?
which
We have it? I bet
yes,
we did.
Scott has printed it out.
Oh, there it is.
So this
Thank you, Scott.
summarizes the changes made by the House bill, not the underlying law. So I'm gonna kind of orient you a little bit. Sections 1 through 5 are all existing law that gets amended. Section 6 is the new paid leave program the House is proposing. Section 7 through the end of the bill are various other provisions that would either amend existing law or create session law necessary to implement the program. So in section 1 and 2, we're amending the existing job protected leave law. Representative Stevens alluded to this. Currently under our existing law, if you have 10 or more employees who work an average of 30 hours a week or more, that's very important, you have to provide parental leave to your employees. If you have 15 or more employees who work an average of 30 hours a week or more, you have to provide parental and family medical leave to your employees. Importantly, your employees are only eligible to take this if they've been working for you for a year at an average of at least 30 hours a week. The federal law starts at 50 employees. So
Right, they think that's.
very, very few employers in Vermont are covered by that. So what the House does here in sections 1 and 2 is they take the existing law, they add bereavement leave, safe leave, which is leave for reasons related to domestic or sexual violence, and qualifying exigency leave, which, as Representative Stevens mentioned, is related to exigencies around the active duty military service of a family member. So for example, if your family member is in the Guard or the Reserves and they get called up to active duty on short notice, you may need to make arrangements for care of a child or relocation of the family, financial arrangements, other things. Qualifying exigency leave gives you leave for that. It also gives you leave to attend military ceremonies for departure or return from active duty service. And I can send to Scott the federal regulation that lays out everything. We are tracking exactly what the federal law here, but this would expand it to a large number of Vermonters who don't currently have it. The other thing is it makes clarifications to parental leave to clarify that applies to both recovery from childbirth or miscarriage, and then must occur within 1 year after birth or adoption. Some of that is implicit in our law, but it's not explicit. So this is just making it explicit. It expands the definition of family member for purposes of the bill. And when we do a more in-depth walkthrough, I'll go through that, but it is a significant expansion of that definition. It replaces our pre-federal FMLA definition of serious illness with the federal FMLA definition of serious health condition, clarifying that it's coverage for injuries, inpatient care, including in hospice and residential treatment facilities, continuing treatment by a healthcare provider rather than just a physician, which is particularly important given that many Vermonters are treated by a PA or a nurse practitioner. And it also provides coverage, which is provided under the federal law, in which we are not allowed to discriminate on the basis of for folks like Christian Scientists who do medical treatment through a Christian Science practitioner. So that's a rough sort of overview of the changes there. So it's a pretty big change to the underlying law. It doesn't change the length of the law or length of the leave, except to provide that the safe leave is in addition to the other forms of leave.
And it's all 12 weeks.
So it's 12 weeks for everything but bereavement. Bereavement is capped at 2 of the 12 weeks could be used for bereavement. The House decided to keep safe leave separate under the thinking that you could potentially have a child, and then later in the year, your partner becomes violent and you need to leave the home with your new child. And they didn't want to leave the abused partner in a difficult situation if they had used up their medical leave or their leave for childbirth or for a medical condition for a family member, and then we're stuck in a home with a violent partner.
Right. Can I ask a question regarding the Christian Science practitioners? Does that exist as a medical provider elsewhere in Vermont law?
It exists under the federal FMLA,
Okay.
which is what we tracked here.
Okay.
So it was, our existing law said physician. And typically our existing law had been interpreted as being consistent with federal law, but here the wording was clearly inconsistent with what the federal law
Just wondering
provides.
if there are any
Yeah.
constitutional issues regarding separation of church and state, regarding using Christian Science practitioners as authorized healthcare providers.
So for purposes of this, this is making sure we don't discriminate on the basis of religion against religions that don't believe in using Western medicine, but for example, use religious healing or something like that within their religion. Federally, they've recognized Christian Science practitioners. They haven't recognized other sorts of faith healing explicitly in the federal law. But I imagine if there was a question, it would be decided on a case-by-case basis.
But imagine if there's something in federal law that allows it. I wonder if Christian Science practitioners submitting bills to Medicaid.
No, so I don't
Yeah.
know that happens. I think this is simply allowing people to get leave from work if they're being healed under the guidance of a Christian Science practitioner. And that's what we've done, is we've simply tied that definition to the federal definition. So it's the same requirements that employers would have to comply with under FMLA. So we're not setting a different bar for the employers. And that same thing we did with the qualifying exigency, is to try to keep it consistent with a body of law where there's a lot of precedent. There's a lot of guidance already out there. And so it'll be easier, rather than reinventing the wheel in Vermont and saying, we're going to add all these categories that weren't previously covered. Christian Science practitioner came up in particular. In the House, there was a constituent who was a Christian Scientist who contacted the chair of the House Committee on General and Housing and brought up that the Vermont law was inconsistent with the federal law. And so if they had moved to a smaller employer under Vermont law, they wouldn't have been covered under the old language. And it raised that issue, and when they started looking at it, they realized, hey, we've also excluded nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, and others who are licensed healthcare providers who could be your lead care provider under Vermont's medical licensing statutes too. And so they decided to go with the federal definition.
Okay.
So, and with
Hey,
that,
with that, we got through
Yeah.
section 1.
so sections 1 and 2, actually. Section 2, we've added some clarifying language. And I'll go into that in more depth. Section 3 is just a technical change. It's taking language regarding hearings against stalking or sexual assault, which are now covered under safe leave. And so it's just moving it from one existing job protected leave law to the other. Sections 4 and 5, Representative Stevens mentioned this. Sections 4 and 5 take that existing law in July 1, 2026, when benefits would start, and they move it so that it's consistent with anyone able to receive benefits would be able to take job protected leave. This is a very significant change in Vermont's law, because right now, as Representative Stevens mentioned, roughly 78 or 80% of Vermont employers have fewer than 10 employees.
Right.
And then if you stretch that out to 10 3/4 time or above employees, suddenly you're probably looking at more like 85% don't meet the current threshold for just parental leave. And so this is going to extend it to all of those employers. So that'll be,
So this addresses sort of the patchwork of time that people work for smaller employees.
right. And so that'll be a significant policy question for you to weigh, is just looking at that expansion and the job protection it provides, because that's what provides the ability for the individual to have their job held open for them unless one of the exceptions is met, which include things like layoffs and plant closures and so forth. But so that'll be an important one to highlight. I'm not even going to try to start touching on what's in section 6, except to say that that's the
So
lease
section
program.
5 is, section 5 is a part, 4 and 5 go together.
4 and 5 go together, just like 1 and 2 do.
Okay, right.
So looking at the rest of the bill, sorry, I promised to be at 70,000 feet and I dropped down to about
I was gonna say,
5,000.
It's hard. What's up?
It is for me anyway.
no,
Section
6,
7 provides tax sharing authority to the Department of Taxes necessary for the administration of the program. I'm just skipping section 6 because it's the program. It would take
huge.
about 4
Okay, so
hours.
section 7 is on page,
It's page 6 of the summary. There you go.
oh, there it is.
Yep. Section 8 just requires rulemaking to be finished by April 1 of 2025, which is 3 months before taxes start being collected. Section 9 requires education and outreach beginning on June 1, 2025 and running. So first, the materials have to be ready by June 1, and then there has to be monthly informational sessions provided for employers, employees, and self-employed for the following year. Section 10 is just a report back on how the setup of the program's going. Section 11 is an annual report on how the program's reserves are doing. Section 12 is transitional language allowing employers who are going to opt out of paying taxes with the start of the program. Section 13 is where you'll find the appropriation. Section 14 was deleted. Section 15 is where you'll find the initial positions needed for FY24 in the new Division of Family and Medical Leave. I want to just pause here to note there was a question about moving the division to labor or somewhere else in the future. You could do that. This would be a completely separate division of government. It's like the Division of Fire Safety or
Division of Banking or Insurance.
exactly. So you could move it somewhere else as a division.
Did
It's
they
like a
talk,
module.
It's a module. It's brand new. We're
did they
not-
talk about anchoring it in DFR?
Uh,
I mean, it is an insurance program.
so DFR, and they can testify for themselves,
Right.
but their testimony in the House is initially they were working more closely with the division. And they testified that this is really outside of their area of expertise. So they do insurance regulation, not insurance administration. And so their concern was, we don't have a role in administering insurance. We regulate the insurance companies. And so they felt that that wasn't a good fit for them, and labor this time around wasn't included at all. And so this division was put within Treasury.
Treasury said yes.
Yes. So
Just a quick, when you
Yep.
say labor wasn't included at all, were they not included in that conversation or?
they
any
did
conversation?
testify in the
They-
Okay.
House. They were not included as an entity named in the bill.
Until
And they were fine with that,
well,
They,
or.
they're not at
Or
all.
maybe
so,
that's
yeah, I mean,
to be-
so they don't have, as Representative Stevens alluded to, labor, and again, they should testify for themselves.
Yeah.
They
But
will.
labor's programs are, so unemployment compensation is federally funded. You cannot use any UI capabilities, such as they are, for anything else without refunding the program. You cannot use those staff for multiple purposes.
Okay.
Wage and hour is 2 people and part of an attorney. Workers' compensation is dedicated to workers' compensation. VOSHA is chronically understaffed and underfunded.
And their mainframe could not deal with this.
Okay.
at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what, okay.
So, I mean,
Thanks.
and then labor market information is federally funded again.
So,
Okay,
So we're kind of stuck there where they would need to create a whole new division too.
okay.
They don't have any excess capacity to take. this
okay, I'm
on.
just gonna keep us on
Yeah,
task
sorry.
here
Yep.
because we gotta end in 2 minutes.
Section 16 is just basic language requiring BGS to allocate space in a state building for the new division. Section 17 and 18 create a tax credit for individuals earning less than $25,000 in wages or self-employment income. It is a very small credit, but we can talk about that when we
Right.
get to it. Section 19 is the effective dates, which are all over the place. But
Right.
the key thing is the contributions for the program would start July 1, 2025. Benefits would become available July 1, 2026, if you were eligible. So,
Great. We will
and-
have you back to move from the 70,000 foot.
it's, I would say, set aside at least 2 hours. It's gonna take time and
It's
there
gonna take some time.
are gonna be a lot of questions, so.
Great. So we will do that and we really apologize, but we
No,
got
that's
through a
fine.
lot of the floor backlog. So we did well on the floor, even if it took us away from you. So thank you for this. And we're going to,
There's Keisha.
oh my gosh, pretty in pink.
Maybe she had something.
Keisha, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I just wanted you to know I'm here as we wrap up and have been listening. It was a good discussion.
Great. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Great color.
You look great.
You and I are like Easter eggs.
That's
together.
right. Thank you so much.
And it's just for.
And, oh my gosh, and Anne has purple.
I'm
Yeah.
trying. It's cool.
So- So thank you. We will reschedule you, Damien, because I think we need to,
Yeah.
we need to at least understand what we have been sent and really understand it. And so we will put down a 2-hour slot at some point in the next little bit.
All right.
Great. Thank you
Sounds
all
good.
very much. And Keisha, good to see you. We're going to go off and adjourn and go in.